So it looks like we might be having some difficulties with some of the panelists. My name is Mark Balaguer. I'm a systems engineer, but I appreciate everyone joining today to talk about the 13 types of email threats that we need to know about right now. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If there's anything you want to chat about or ask questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and click on the panels and go ahead and ask those questions. And we'll try to make sure we can get all those answered at the end or follow up with you in the future. This webinar is also being recorded, so if you do have anything you'd like to go back and review or anything like that, you'll be able to receive a copy of it. You can go back and take a listen as well. And as I said before, my name is Mark Balaguer, systems engineer at Barracuda MSP. I've been in IT and specifically security for a couple different companies for a little over 13 years now. So really appreciate everyone joining. I hope this is an educational experience for everyone, and we can learn a little bit more about how to better protect ourselves for some of the threats that are out there. So again, the focus today, the 13 email threat types and what you really need to know about right now. So as I'm sure you're all aware, email is the #1 threat vector out there. We see actually almost 3/4 of all attacks starting through email. Spear phishing and social engineering are actually the most effective of those types of attacks, and we're seeing that leading to 93% of all email breaches. So very, very important to make sure that you have email as the most important threat vector on your mind about how people are getting attacked and taken advantage of and being ransomed. So we just look at some of the ramifications and some of those impacts that has on our organization. Estimated over $170 billion worth of losses due to ransomware in 2019. 43% of organizations have fallen victim to spear phishing attacks, and we've seen 1 in 7 organizations experience an account takeover. So these impacts are huge and far-reaching for many of the businesses out there. So these can also have impacts on things that sometimes it's hard to put a number on. So loss of productivity, loss of data. What are those other intangible costs? How is this going to harm that business's reputation? Is your customer base going to still trust you? What is the other impact that you can't really necessarily put an actual dollar value on, but it's still going to really hurt your progress, hurt your relationships, all those things that you're going to have to deal with in the future because of this single attack that happened, and how you want to take care of that. So for now, we want to take a look at what we're kind of seeing as trends with these email attacks and what these threats are doing. So really, we've defined 13 different types of categories, starting from the least complex, going with spam and malware, to the most complex with things like conversation hijacking, lateral phishing, and account takeover. And really, we're seeing a trend moving from the less complex, kind of the spam or the malware, that bulk email, that spray and pray type of tactic. Hey, we send this to 10,000 people, see if someone bites. Well, a lot of services and protections are getting smart enough to prevent a lot of that from happening. And so we're seeing this trending to those more complex attacks because they're having a little bit more time put into them, but a lot higher success rate. And so we're also seeing combinations of multiple techniques together, kind of one on top of the other, to kind of grow and infiltrate an industry or a business. And so you really need your defenses to be more robust as well. So now we can just, let's just break down one of these, or actually a couple of them. So first off, let's talk about business email compromise and see what's going on here. So we see number 1 here, some impersonation techniques going on. If you look closely, you'll see the 2 is at acme.org, acme.org, and then the from is acrne.net. But the RN looks close to an M, so if you're sitting at home or lounging around or on your phone and maybe you don't really pay attention to all that information, you could be easily fooled by some of that. The second thing we see is a sense of urgency. We need you to do this right away or as soon as you can. And then the last thing, that number 3, usually this is going to be from a CEO or an executive. So you see in that from CEO at .mail. So you're seeing this authority figure being spoofed or impersonated. And so now this person looking at this email might initially think, oh boy, I got to get this done right away. I want to be a good employee. I want to go ahead and make sure, I get this taken care of for my boss. But the big things you see here is that it's a high reputation sender. So a filter is not going to see this as a known malicious domain. Maybe it's something the attacker had just set up recently, so it doesn't have a negative reputation as a spam website or a malware website. There's no links in this email, and there's no attachments in this email, so it's just text. So there's nothing that a gateway is going to see as, oh, this is a virus, or oh, this is a bad piece of software that we don't want to let on the network. And so a lot of times it's just going to go right through. Kind of a similar type of attack, the service impersonation, kind of preying on the same thing. So we see, again, there's no malicious payload here. And what's really troublesome about this is, it's a request to review recent activity with that blue button. Unfortunately, that blue button is linked to a high-quality fake login page. But what the attacker's done is they've compromised another legitimate business and then used their domain to host this fake login page. And so now, because that link is not seen as a malicious site, because that hacker's compromised that high reputation domain, when the user clicks on that blue button, they're going to get to this landing page where they'll think, hey, I'm going to enter my credentials because I got this Microsoft email, but instead that account is going to become compromised because the attacker can harvest those credentials. So taking a little bit closer look at how this whole account takeover process works. First thing what we just saw, that attacker is going to get those credentials so they can compromise the account, whether that's through some kind of malware, some kind of phishing attack, a spear phishing attack, some kind of breach that's going to get them credentials that gets their foot in the door. The next thing they're going to do is they're learning. They're going to watch what's going on in that environment, collect all the information they can, and see if they can try to, again, compromise additional accounts once they have their foothold in there. And then finally, they're going to go ahead and launch their attacks, find out a way to monetize this. What can they do to make this attack and this process the most profitable for them? So really, it's kind of a low and slow basis of attack, taking a lot of time to learn the environment, learn how to effectively communicate with other people in the organization. What are the key terms or buzzwords or phrasings that people in the organization use? And then once they do that, then they can start compromising more and more accounts and launch these additional attacks. And so now that they have these familiar phrasings down and they understand internal processes, they can go ahead and send out calls to action that are going to appear legitimate. So a big one was going to be a money transfer. So maybe the attacker has already been in this organization through multiple accounts for months even, and then they're realizing, oh, this business is going to buy a new property somewhere, for example, and so they're watching the correspondence between maybe a mortgage company or whoever's doing that financial transaction, and they can follow up with an email that says, oh, actually we just changed our bank account. Let's actually, we need you to shift those funds over to this other account, which of course the attacker has control over, and then they can make a huge payday off of harvesting that information. And so that kind of low and slow attack, but they waited and they found the right time till a big transaction was going to come through, and then they capitalized. And so it can be really damaging to an organization because this whole time they never knew anything bad was happening or was going on in their organization, and now all of a sudden a down payment for a mortgage or something is out the door. So here's actually a real life example of something we saw. We see this email from a trusted sender, and then we see this link. So even though this link doesn't point to Microsoft, you see that the recipient's probably likely to trust that link because it came from a trusted sender. So basically this means that the attacker is already in this organization and is now sending a link to someone else in the organization to a malicious site, but because it's coming from that trusted sender, it's going to go ahead and be more likely that recipient is going to click that link. And so again, this land and expand strategy has become very profitable for the attackers, and they're continuing to spend lots of time crafting these legitimate looking customized attacks. So what protections need to be in place to beat this sort of thing? Well, it's a couple things actually that need to go on. So two forms of defense here. You've got a gateway type of defense, and you've got an inbox type of defense. So the gateway is going to sit in front of your mail server, basically interpret inbound and outbound messages and traffic. whereas an inbox defense is going to determine threats inside the mailbox. But the key is that both of these forms are necessary in order to be successful for all these types of threats. So just taking a little bit of a closer look at it, the gateway defense is going to work really well for things like spam, malware, data exfiltration, providing those types of protections. So, remembering nicer, quieter, simpler days, we basically had a secure email gateway that guarded the infrastructure. It was really effective. It was, hackers would come up with better ways to go ahead and send these malicious emails, and then the gateway companies would continue to innovate about better ways to keep things secure. So it was a little bit of an arms race to making sure that that environment was always secure. And so that was all great until the attackers realized they could bypass the gateway entirely. And so with things like combined inboxes on people's cell phone applications, so now they're looking at their personal accounts as well as their work email on a single screen, attackers are taking advantage of this. So now they're having attacks come in from every direction to the point where, when you wake up in the morning and you're still half asleep and you're checking your email, it looks like a work email, but it may have come through your personal account, but you weren't paying attention. So you become even more susceptible to these types of social engineering attacks. Same thing, maybe you're in a rush at your lunch break trying to take care of something, while you're eating on your tablet or just before you go to bed. Attackers are aware of all these things, and they're really trying to capitalize on these vulnerabilities and use this social engineering. So the API inbox is working to help defend all of these types of attacks because they're understanding what's going on in the environment. So protection from spear phishing, brand impersonation, account takeover, just to name a few. So all these other things of these attacks that we're seeing are all really being taken care of by that inbox protection. So talking a little bit about the gateway-based pros and cons, just to really kind of dive in a little bit further as to what the use case is and why they're both really, really important. So gateway is really better for those high volume attacks. It's going to save the performance load on the infrastructure, preventing spam and malware from even reaching that inbox by matching signatures. It also provides advanced threat protection with sandboxing technology to protect from those zero-day type of malware and ransomware attacks. So this is really, really important. If something comes on to the network that you're not aware of its behavior, it could be really, really damaging because that could be a brand new threat that hasn't been seen before. And this is becoming more and more common with ransomware especially, and that in combination with Bitcoin payments allowing attackers to remain anonymous. So you want to make sure that everything is getting scanned at the gateway, and even if it doesn't match a signature or something that's known about, we're able to go ahead and detonate that file in a cloud somewhere so we can understand what its true nature is. And so we identify that, hey, this is a brand new type of malicious attack. It looks a little bit different than some other ones we've seen, but it still does that same malicious thing. And so you don't want to let that on the network. Very, very important to provide that protection through the gateway because it is a pretty resource intensive process, but again, it's more important to deal with that at the gateway level than having something go into all the inboxes where it becomes a real burden that often can really hamper performance of the inbox itself. And so you want to get that done at the gateway. Again, very, very important. And also the other piece, a lot of people kind of maybe overlook a little bit. Everyone's obviously concerned about, what are these nasty things coming in from the internet? What is, all this malware and ransomware and viruses, being sent to me? You also need to stop and think, hey, we don't want to let people just send emails that have credit card numbers in them or have potentially, sensitive information about intellectual property. So you also want your gateway to make sure that it's monitoring what's being sent out. And so personal information that shouldn't be released out into the open isn't going there, and instead maybe is encrypted and staying in a secure environment, or maybe is being quarantined for approval, or it's just right out blocked. So we know we don't want to let any of that information out of the organization. There are some limits to the gateway approach, though. So a lot of these rules and policies that are set up are based on directory access. So what's listed in directory and how we make policy based on that. So tying into LDAP. And a lot of these rules are obviously going to be focused on executives, high target individuals, people in finance with access to money, stuff like that. But unfortunately, a lot of times they can be ineffective in some senses because they're not very scalable. and they don't oftentimes take context into account for different types of scenarios. So just a little bit more on that. For example, if I wanted to impersonate a CEO who is named Matthew Johnson, maybe they're protecting anything outside coming that says this comes from Matthew Johnson. That's listed in the entry. That's a policy that says, all right, if we see something from outside our network that says Matthew Johnson, we're going to block that. So hey, we've got that taken care of. Now we're protected. No one can spoof our CEO from outside of our network. Well, it sounds great, but what if I am on LinkedIn and figure out that, oh, okay, the president and CEO of this company is Matthew Johnson. Well, I'm just going to send an email that says I'm Matthew R. Johnson or Matt Johnson or Johnson Matthew. So all these different iterations that aren't listed in that rule set can very easily circumvent those type of rules. Same thing goes with deceptive language from a content filter. So, hey, we've got a policy that if anything says wire transfer coming inbound with a request, we want to block it. Whatever variation of that rule might be. So no problem. I send a bunch of emails. One says fund transfer, one says money transfer, one says make a payment, one says process invoice. There's a bunch of different ways that you can convey that message, and a lot of times you're going to get one of those through, or multiple of them through, because it's just unreasonable to think that you could build a rule set with thousands and thousands of different entries to account for each one of these situations. You get into the situation where you're going to start creating false positives. So you're going to begin to block legitimate messages because you've got so many rules for so many iterations of other things. And so it's just really not an effective way to provide protection for this type of thing. So that kind of leads us based to the API, or application programmable interface, pros and cons. And so this is something that's going to be tied into the inbox to protect it directly. So what's happening is that the API is able to use historical data and internal data from the environment to understand that user activity. And that's what's going on the right side of this picture here. So the email's coming in from the email server to the inbox. Well, that inbox protection, in Barracuda's case, it's called Sentinel, is that API tied into the inbox where we're reviewing historical data and information about the organization to go ahead and provide this protection. So what's really going on is we're using machine learning algorithms to evaluate multiple factors and attributes to more reliably determine the threats and attacks. So things like, hey, what email addresses does this user use? Or where did they sign in from? Or how are they signing their emails? Or what type of requests do they usually make? All these different things that we come to understand as normal behavior. And so once we know what the normal behavior is, we have this identity of this is what this user does, this is their normal activity. Now we can identify abnormal behavior based on this internal and historical data to spot anomalies, any sign-ins from an unusual location, for example. And so by doing this, it allows you to avoid the need for those hundreds or thousands of rules that aren't scalable, like we talked about before. Again, so just back to our other review slide, what's good for the API defense versus what's good for the gateway. So again, the API inbox defense is not really effective for those high volume attacks just because it can easily overwhelm an inbox if they have to scan all these new things constantly and everything is allowed to be delivered. So really the conclusion that we need to reach is both the gateway and the inbox protection are needed to be effective. And so that's really what we want to stress here. So with just the gateway defense, you are vulnerable to those spear phishing and social engineering related attacks because those emails often have no malicious payload and they can be detected by a gateway because it's simply text. There's no virus, there's no malware. It's just going to be a text message that was social engineered to elicit a reaction or a sense of urgency. Well, with just the inbox defense, your inboxes are going to be bombarded and overloaded with spam and malware. And so it's just not going to be able to process that much data. And so that's really why you need both of these types of defenses. So talking a little bit about strategies that can improve your email protection and how you can do that. So the first thing I want to let you know about is we have released a copy of an ebook that you'll be provided a link to, and really highlighting those 13 types of email threats that we saw earlier, what they entail, how they're orchestrated, really everything you know. So this is a free to download, and again, you'll get a link for that a little bit later on. But what we really want to capitalize on with that is that it's a great resource that you can use and also pass along to your customers so that they can better understand the value and need for both the gateway and the inbox protection. And then you can work with them to kind of determine the best ways to provide protection for their specific organization. What policies do you need to set up? And also streamline that incident response to make sure that if anything does happen, you have a plan to go ahead and take care of it. You can also get started. Today, I would recommend we offer a free email threat scan to show customers what's been missed in their environment. I'll also be getting links to that information as well. And this is a really great tool to highlight where protection has been lacking in environments. Just a couple highlights from the page here. We've seen over 4 million spear phishing attacks since 2018. And so you just can really show your user, look, whatever protection you had in place, if you're not covering all the bases in a sense, you can see that these attacks are everywhere. And so it really demonstrates that need for a layered security approach. So in fact, we've actually built our product portfolio to support that layered security approach to security. So a couple things going on here. Barracuda Essentials is providing that gateway defense that we talked about, advanced threat protection, sandboxing, data loss prevention, encryption, resiliency, all kind of the responsibility of that email security gateway. Barracuda Sentinel is that API inbox protection, going to stop that brand hijacking, catching those social engineering attacks using artificial intelligence. And then another piece that we like to layer on top of that is called Barracuda Fishline. And this provides sort of the last line of defense for the weakest link in the organization, and that's the human firewall. So making sure that you're training your employees to spot potential threats, to thwart phishing attacks on unsecured personal accounts, just making sure that they're aware of what's going on out there and turning that kind of liability into an asset. So now they're going to see something suspicious and notify your security team or let other people know this looks like a phishing attack. And so they're not going to just go clicking on things at random. And so the approach is totally modular. So you can layer on these defenses wherever you think you need a boost, or obviously we recommend utilizing all three components to really get the ultimate in email protection and really kind of locking down that threat vector. So next steps, obviously recommend reading the ebooks, reading about the trends that we're seeing in the survey, and then check out smartermsp.com to see more information about what we're seeing in the industry and how we can possibly make improvements to your MSP and how you can additionally help your customers. So that's everything for today. I really appreciate everyone joining and taking the time, and thank you very much. I'll take a look at the chat and see if we have any questions. So I'm not seeing any questions. I can hang out for a couple minutes, but just want to make sure. Yep, so the slides will be available for download. You should get a follow-up link sometime later today or tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark, for everything. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As we said, the link to the slides will be available either later this afternoon or first thing tomorrow for you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.